The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, this is Brian for Bringing Down Security this week. We're going to get into part 2 of our discussion with Shlomi Oberman about the RIPPLE20 report. I don't know, as of 23rd of July, Dark Reading had put out a report about the after effects of RIPPLE20. Can reverberate for years, almost a ripple effect, I think is what they were trying to get to. But what you'll find in the RIPPLE20 report discussion on Dark Reading is that this isn't going away. A lot of the vulnerabilities, of course, they say the most common CWE values are CWE 20, 125, and 200. 20 impacts the ability to effectively validate user input, allowing an adversary to execute malicious code. 125, CWE 125, and these are common weakness enumerations, so these aren't CVEs or CW or CVSS scores or anything like that. This is more geared towards speaking in the way developers can understand and understand, and grok what's going on with their code. With 125 grants an adversary the ability to read memory outside of the intended buffer, and CWE 200 is a vulnerability that could result in the potential exposure of sensitive information. So those have different vulnerability severities and impacts, and over the next couple of weeks we're going to talk a little bit about the CVSS scoring systems and why things are a level 10 when sometimes they may not be. So it's important to understand 4 of the RIPPLE20 flaws have a CVSS score of 9 or higher, meaning they can be weaponized for devastating impact, depending on the configuration, is what we're gonna say. So, so we're gonna get right into our discussion here with Shlomi. We're gonna talk about whether or not all of this was worth it to the company or to Trecks or the TCP community. Talk about some supply chain issues, software bill of materials, and etc. So, hope you have a great rest of your week. Be kind to one another and take care of yourselves. Was disclosure of vulnerabilities and supply chain security. So, we talked in the previous show about, how you went about talking to Trecks, but there's a number of companies out there, and I mentioned this in the last show, that the webcams have vendors, D-Link and Linksys routers use Broadcom and Raylink and Intel-based chipsets. So they don't build all of their stuff in-house. They outsource it to other organizations. So you mentioned last week that you went and talked to the customers of the people that are using, Treck in this case for the TCP IP connections. I did some research and found a NIST document talking about supply chain risk management. What do you do when you don't know what's in your own tech stack? I think we see a lot of that with, companies that, are using Node.js, and, it's not just supply chain security and embedded devices. It's also, hey, I've got a WordPress site and I've got 1,800, plugins because my salespeople need to know how many clicks or, where the eyeballs are looking at on the web page. What, in your opinion, and somebody who's, had to go through this with, this company, what should companies try to think about when they don't even know how deep the hole goes or what's in their tech stack? I mean, do you have any particular opinions on things that they should be doing there?
So it comes down to different actors, right? There's the product vendors, and then there's the network operators. And the public. There's an idea, a concept called SBOM, S-B-O-M, software bill of materials. And maybe I'll talk about that in a moment, but I think that basically what all these actors should be doing is the same. They should be applying upward pressure on their suppliers and saying, hey, make sure that your third-party code, make sure that your supply chain is secure, and make sure that you know what's in your supply chain. Because I think a lot of these companies sort of assume that responsibility will fall. Like, I think some of these vendors using Treck, they sort of said, okay, Treck wrote the code. It's their responsibility. It's their liability. Like, if somebody finds a vulnerability, it's a Treck vulnerability. But it doesn't quite work like that. When you buy a printer, when you buy a power relay, when you buy an industrial control device, and there's a vulnerability in it, you don't care like who wrote the code. Like, if you buy a car and the brakes don't work, you don't care who made the brakes. Your car vendor should have tested the brakes. So the companies should really realize it's their problem and sort of apply pressure on their suppliers to make sure that every part of the supply chain does secure coding, does penetration testing, performs good security hygiene, exploit mitigations, etc. And there's this idea of SBOM, security bill of materials, which is very common in hardware. Like, if somebody buys a piece of hardware, like in almost any industry, they'll get a list of what's inside there. Often it's required for regulation purposes, but with software, you don't have that. So software bill of materials comes and says, if I buy a piece of software or I buy a device, it comes with a list of what's included. So that when something like RIPPLE20 is published, I can go and look at all my lists, all my software bills of material, and see whether Treck appears anywhere there. Contact my suppliers, say, what are you doing about this? I wouldn't say it's the solution. It's half the solution, because still, JSOF would still have to track down the vulnerable companies at first. But as soon as it's public, we wouldn't have to do that anymore, because the network operators, like, if Bank of America wants to know which of their products are vulnerable, or, your local power utility, then, they just go and look at the software bill of materials they were given by their different suppliers, and they do Control-F, Treck TCP/IP, and they see which devices are potentially vulnerable.
That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, software bill of materials should be part of your documentation, part of your loadout. Security people should have access to those things, not just from a device point of view, but even in the DevOps environment. You should understand what your software is using or what your applications are using. The thing is, I don't think customers ask for it. So, there's a bill of materials, but that's usually hardware based. So, wow. Yeah, I could definitely see that being something that needs to be revised in a lot of organizations. It would also go down towards your vendor assessment, right? So if you're trying to figure out if your software is using specific, because we're hearing a lot of that from organizations that don't want to use specific companies like the Huawei's out there. If your network kit uses Huawei chipsets, do you know to actually ask those questions about what's inside there? So it's all about managing your risk. If you're a program manager or somebody who's trying to put new software in, that's something you should look at when you're vetting your vendors, your third parties, because your third parties have third parties as well. And that's why supply chain management is so important. So one of the things when I was doing last week when we talked about some custom TCP systems was, I don't want to get into freedom of code, but the Pico TCP link that I put in the show notes also talked about they don't release all their code. It's an open source, and I use that in quotey fingers, project, but they have binary blobs. So, if you're a company that likes to inspect the code or make sure that your third party is, doing code reviews, how do you make it so that all of the code is available? Because they even Pico says that they use binary blobs, which are precompiled bits of code that you can't actually review. So you talked last week about having to do internal analysis. Is there any kind of risk or reward by having a fully open software stack versus not? There was a
Yeah,
question.
so I think I might disappoint a few people with my answer here, but like when we work with our clients and we tell them manage your third-party risk and make sure that they're doing assessments, and if you need be do your own assessments of the security, we don't always see that open source means that the security was vetted more. We don't always see that the security is better, and I think it's somewhat more true for complex things like TCP/IP stacks. TCP/IP stack is a very complex product, and in order for it to be maintained well, you really need a good support system, and then these projects also don't necessarily have liability. Like some of our clients that have used open source projects, we went to those open source projects, we found bug reports that looked like vulnerabilities to us, but the maintainer didn't necessarily care if they were vulnerabilities or not, because he's volunteering, right? He doesn't necessarily want to look into that and see if it's a vulnerability. So like unless you can use some of the big known open source projects, like if you can use the Linux TCP/IP stack, that's great. That's super secure. We'd recommend that over a lot of stuff. If you can use, like we might want to do some hardening, but we'd recommend that. If you can use FreeBSD TCP/IP stack, that's great. If you can use a really small TCP/IP stack that really is limited in features, that's also great. But just sort of picking up an open source TCP/IP stack, I wouldn't say that's more secure than buying a proprietary TCP/IP stack and making sure that they perform secure code review and penetration testing, had security mitigations, etc. So yeah, there is kind of some trade-off, but I wouldn't say that the open source is always more secure.
Okay, Ms. Berlin, you got a question?
No, I was just chewing, but
oh, okay. Well, I saw you click on one of the questions in the show notes. So
yeah. No, a couple of them he had already answered. So
yeah.
When you are, I mean, I'm sure you've contacted more than just Treck. But what is that initial? You talked a little bit about the initial contact, like you had to talk to or send an email to their sales team. Now they have a security thing. You have like a templated. This is who we are. This is what we found. Please contact us. Or I don't know, like sometimes people go public. Sometimes there are vulnerability disclosure programs, that kind of stuff. Do you have any kind of just initial format that you go by?
Yeah, so this case was sort of like more complex than most disclosure processes, with there being so many companies. So like a lot of the work we did with CertCC and CISA, etc. And then with many of the vendors, you can't really force your own template because they force you to fill out this form, or you send them an email and they answer you after 2 weeks saying, wait, you have to classify this according to our classification system and tell us, all kinds of stuff like that. So each vendor is different, and some of the vendors were difficult, to be honest. So yeah, we have a template. I can't say that we've used it that much. Yeah.
Okay. I can see that. Yeah, and I've heard stories of vendors being very difficult, and then that's when like the whole public disclosure thing happens usually, right? Like,
yeah, so we try to be as as responsible as possible, doing letting everybody know. Even now, some of the names we're not publishing, and some of the names we're waiting on, even though we've been waiting for a month or 2 months or 3 months. So we're trying to be as responsible as possible. We haven't seen to date any vendors sort of saying we're not vulnerable when they were. So that's like the worst we could see. In that case, we might go public.
Yeah. But
we've seen things not far from that, to be honest. We've seen some vendors struggling with checking whether their devices are vulnerable or not.
Yeah, I would imagine denial is the first thing you get from folks. Oh yeah, no, we're not vulnerable. It's, you know, we
and also like a company that's been around for that long, they may have had customers 20 years ago that they no longer have.
Oh, yeah.
So trying to contact and find out everyone, I imagine, would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the layering effect, right? And all these companies that went bankrupt along the way. And
right.
And some of the bigger companies have like huge product portfolios. So it's a big challenge for them to figure out.
Right.
Like one of the vendors we contacted, we're still not sure which of the products are vulnerable or not because they're still researching, but they had two completely different products in two completely different like parts of the company, two completely different divisions. And one like bought a device, a component that was vulnerable, and the other one incorporated an operating system that was vulnerable. So two completely different tracks, two completely different stories, two completely different divisions, but then, you know, same people have to deal with both of these issues. So it can be quite challenging for all of the companies.
Yeah.
The one company I saw on the list I thought was pretty interesting was Caterpillar.
Yeah. It's an interesting story with Caterpillar. They asked at some point if they're listening to this, and we're giving you an answer now because we didn't want to give them an answer. First, how did we know that Caterpillar is vulnerable? And we don't know which product is vulnerable in Caterpillar to this day. And the answer is a lot of the work we did finding vulnerable companies was through LinkedIn. So Treck being a leading TCP/IP stack, programmers that use it will both saying, you know, I'm proficient in using the Treck TCP/IP stack. So we found this guy who used to work on in Caterpillar who said, like, I integrated TCP/IP stack into this product. So we said, hey, maybe Caterpillar, you know, have a vulnerable product, which turns out they do. So yeah, that's how we reached Caterpillar. We don't know what the product is. I
was kind of hoping like it was a bulldozer or something.
I think it is. We said some other stuff about the product, but we don't know.
Yeah, great. So, you know, I can control my drone 18-ton, you know, bulldozer while I'm sitting at home, you know, sipping back some cold brews or whatever. Wow, that sucks. So I want to, you know, doing some research, I found this NIST document on supply chain risk management. They mention several principles that they like to put in here, and one of them is develop your defenses based on the principle that your systems will be breached. There's a lot of people in InfoSec that say you should assume you've already been breached instead of they will be breached. But this is a long game, so you know IoT is not so much the webcams and stuff, because I think that the IoT community, or in some respects, is not I'm going to have this webcam for 20 years. It's going to be more like the Apple iPhone. It's I'm going to upgrade these things every few years so they won't be around. But you know, SCADA and ICS and critical control systems may be around for 20 or 30 years. So when you're developing these things, it seems like, yeah, you need to think about at some point in this decade or whatever, there will be a vulnerability to these. Are there ways that people can protect against that, or should, you know, because I mean, I'm thinking along the lines of like the Intel AMT stuff that happened a few years ago, where there was no patch for it. You couldn't put up a firewall for it because it was, you know, a specific vulnerability that allowed for, you know, network access at a different level, at a different ring on the system. It's very difficult to develop these kinds of defenses, right? I mean, this is something that it's not the end user who has to really think about. It's the device manufacturer, correct?
So I'm really glad you asked that question, because that's one of the things we try to tell, you know, the public and our clients. It's more difficult for the end user, but every company in the supply chain can prevent the impact of the vulnerabilities and can prevent the vulnerabilities completely, even if they didn't write them. And they can prevent vulnerabilities that they wrote as well, by using all kinds of systems and mechanisms to prevent exploitation. Mechanisms called exploit preventions, exploit mitigations, all kinds of security hygiene. And Intel AMT is a really good example because they sort of seem to have learned, full disclosure, I used to work at the Intel AMT security team for a little while. And, I don't know, like what I can see now is that they were affected by some of the RIPPLE20 vulnerabilities, the AMT itself. I didn't work in the AMT security team. I worked in the CSME security team. It's more or less the same product. The AMT was affected by these vulnerabilities, but they were able to say the newer versions of our product are less affected by the vulnerabilities. The impact is lower. And the reason is we implemented exploit mitigations, and it's now no longer a CVSS 9 point something. We've turned it into a much lower, like from a critical vulnerability, it's turned into a 5 point something or something of that sort. So that's a really good example of exploit mitigations. Another company that was able to say the same is Green Hills. They're forced to have some kinds of exploit mitigations and defense in depth. And they issued an advisory saying, yeah, we're affected by Treck. But if you use our systems correctly, and if you configure them correctly, then the vulnerabilities is not as bad as they could be, which is a great thing for a company to say, like, we've prepared for this, and now we're getting paid for our preparations.
Right. Well, so here's the thing. If Treck is an extensible TCP/IP stack and it's extensible because there are size or memory requirements on a device, how much overhead does exploit mitigations add to an operating system? And are they skewing that to ensure that they can fit it on a chip and, instead of it being a $30 device, it's now a $20 device? How do we get companies to say, yes, we're going to add $10 to the price of that because we have to use 6K of memory instead of 4K of memory? I mean, how do we as security people working at those companies get that message across that it's worth that $10 to fix? Or is it a sales thing where it's like, well, they're going to use this for a year anyway and throw it away. Why spend the extra 2K of RAM or memory to, mitigate or to add SLR, or ASLR or DEP or, whatever exploit mitigation functions are in there? How do we make that a selling point to our sales and development people?
For starters, not all the mitigations necessarily require a large amount of memory, a large amount of extra cost, or anything of that sort. And many of the devices also don't have that bad limitations or that severe limitations as they used to. So for many of the mitigations, it's just because people didn't think about them, they didn't consider implementing them, or they didn't require the work. And then the other side of it is how expensive it is to fix vulnerabilities after the product is in the market versus putting in the effort before the vulnerabilities are released, and sleeping better at night for years and years. If you can put this DEP in, at the beginning of the product life, and then, for 20 years you have vulnerabilities that are less severe, or every year you have like critical vulnerability, your clients don't trust you anymore. You have to scramble and build teams to respond to these vulnerabilities, build patches. And then some of these devices are so difficult to patch, so expensive to patch, and rolling out the patches is so difficult. It just doesn't make sense to not put the effort and the price, the money in at the beginning to prevent much larger costs later on.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's not for the low-end home IP cameras. It's for the critical devices. It's for the devices going into military airplanes and factories and railways and UPS devices.
Right. I think not to pile on to Intel there, but I think you just explained Spectre and Meltdown and all the variants of that as well. So there's a huge thing there. they were trying to get more performance, and obviously they introduced these bugs that are going to be around for a very long time. I mean, obviously some of them are largely theoretical. I don't know if there's a working exploit for Spectre and Meltdown that, can be done in that respect. But there's definitely those vulnerabilities exist, much like in the TCP stack. We're going to see those kinds of vulnerabilities for a long time to come. So let me see. The NIST document, one of the other principles they mentioned was this is not necessarily a software issue, but it's a people process issue and knowledge problem. Breaches tend to be less about technology failure and more about human error. IT security systems won't secure critical information and intellectual property unless employees throughout the supply chain use secure cybersecurity practices. Thoughts? Anybody have anything against that, or any ways that
I think all of our problems are people problems.
That's fair. It all comes down to a person, doesn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The machines aren't rising themselves.
Not yet. Judgment Day is coming.
It is 2020, so
right.
Who knows?
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely true, but it's also easy to say and hard to implement.
Right.
And a lot of implementing that comes in the awareness, and then also in the security team, sort of being enablers, allowing the developers, the product teams to implement security rather than just being gatekeepers and sort of saying, don't do this, don't do that. And then, they're seen as the enemy, and, the developers become hackers and find ways to bypass the gates, but not in a good way. So it's definitely a people problem, but then it's also a challenge to solve those people problems and the process problems, so that the products are more secure.
Yeah. So communication, I think, is another thing I'd like to discuss. When you reached out, and we talked last week about how you reached out to Treck and them, you had mentioned in our pre-discussion of this, there was a Japanese counterpart, and you didn't actually talk to them about the vulnerabilities, and it was being controlled by a CERT over there. How has that been helpful in remediating the problem with a subsidiary or another company that's using the technology, or a reseller potentially that is using that technology?
So we tried contacting this Japanese company. They're called Zook and Elmic at this point, and their stack, TCP/IP stack, is called Kasago. It's a version of the Treck stack, or a version derived from the Treck stack. We actually tried contacting them about the same time as Treck. We even wrote them an email in Japanese. My dad actually speaks Japanese, and he had a colleague sort of write something in Japanese, and we sent them an email in Japanese. They were pretty communicative, but it was still difficult, and they just sort of it just sort of got lost, and they never tended to the vulnerabilities. And then months later, like the Japanese CERT, we got them involved with the help of CERT CC. And then they communicated with them. We still don't have a lot of visibility. We've seen a note that they put on their site saying, there have been some vulnerabilities in our products, and we apologize to our customers. We're very sorry, which is, I guess, more of a Japanese thing to do. I don't think an American company would sort of say we're sorry that there was a fault in our systems, not publicly. And then there's quite a few Japanese companies. Some of them we know quite well, and we don't even know that they're Japanese. Like, just, you've probably heard of that about them, and you've never realized they're Japanese companies. And we have less visibility into what the status is of each of those companies. They're less transparent, and we have less communications there. Some of it is in automotive, so we hope that's getting tended to properly. But the Japanese are, they're a very good CERT, and they're taking care of it, so we trust them to get it out to everyone.
So we didn't. That was something. Do you see you mentioned a different response from an American company versus Japanese company, mentioning we're sorry that there are actually vulnerabilities. They apologize on the website. I want to ask if it's a cultural thing, if it's, and how they treat security differently. Is it, did you expect a different response from the Japanese company versus the American company, or did you kind of expect it to be, oh yeah, we're going to go ahead and fix that and not have any issues?
So we didn't really know what to expect. We're not Americans, right? We're based in Israel, so we have a very different culture. I think a lot of the way American companies treat vulnerabilities is just the result of, the pioneers of security disclosure, call it that, over the past 20 years, disclosing over and over. And so everybody's reached the best practices and the coordinated vulnerability disclosure process, etc., which has become a worldwide standard, as well as the government stepping in, right? The ICSR and CISA have a lot of power over some of these companies because a lot of them are government contractors. And I guess maybe that process hasn't matured as much, maybe in the Japanese market. I don't think it's necessarily just a cultural thing. We do see that the Japanese companies that sell a lot in the States seem to have been more open and communicative about it, at least in the manner that we would expect, or in the manner that we've seen from American companies. So it might be somewhat cultural, but I also think it's just, something that has evolved in the American economy is, this is how vulnerability disclosure is done. This is the best practice. You should disclose. You should let your clients know what's happening. Be transparent, right? Just tell them what the severity is. Tell them how many vulnerabilities there are. Tell them where the patches are, and and they'll appreciate you for doing that.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know if there was specific legislation in Japan or in other countries that required mandatory disclosure, or it's probably something I need to go look up and see what they have in other countries. And I know that a lot of in the U.S. isn't legislative. It's more like you get publicly shamed otherwise, and certain cultures, certain companies treat that kind of outing in a different way. So, Mr. Betcher, do you have any other questions? I have a couple left on the show notes here, but I didn't want to hog up all the time here.
Well, just one. I have a car that had an airbag issue, right? So it had a faulty airbag. And what you would do is the vendor would contact you and say, hey, we've got this faulty airbag. We need to replace it. And so you take it in, they do it for free. It's the airbag's made not by the car company, by some vendor on the other side of the world that you've never heard of, right? So how did you initially find out it was Treck? Did you contact these vendors and they disclosed that to you, or were you able to decipher it somehow?
Yeah, so I think with software, things are a little bit different than with hardware. And then we've done quite a lot of work in the automotive world. So even with hardware, usually, like, if you look at the actual airbag, you'll find like a logo on it or something on the actual component. I think that was a Japanese company also, probably the one you're mentioning, if I'm not mistaken, the faulty airbag issues. But since we found a product, or we started working with a product that compiled the Treck stack with debug symbols, we had function names. So we just looked up these function names on Google, and very quickly we found Treck. Right, so that was it. That wasn't difficult. That part was pretty straightforward, and it's common practice, right? When you start reverse engineering, if you find anything that you think might be public knowledge, just search for it. Maybe somebody else did some research on it. Maybe you'll find some documentation or something of the sort. So so as soon as we found some symbols, we searched for them.
It's amazing. You don't have to go to the library anymore. You just type it in your computer. Crazy.
Yep. Cool. Ms. Berlin, do you have any other questions or anything like that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So couple more. I just have a couple more and then we'll be done here. So last week we talked all about how you talked with Treck and got a hold of them. Was this the first time you've reached out to an organization like Treck? And what would you have done differently the next time you talk to a company like Treck, or, knowing now what you have learned? I mean, what would you have done differently? What missteps did you take, and, what would you have done differently?
So I think, to start with, most of our work, like our best work, is sort of under NDA, so we haven't reported a lot of vulnerabilities previously. I think the only vulnerabilities we disclosed publicly, except for some that we're disclosing now, what is after Treck, is a couple of vulnerabilities in the Linux kernel, which was part of work for a client, and the client actually did the disclosure, or most of the disclosure. So it was mostly our first time, but I think even if it wasn't, this is 100 times bigger than a normal disclosure, so I'm not sure that would have helped. We did consult with a few friends that did it before, specifically disclose vulnerabilities in critical devices, so we got some advice. I don't think we would have done anything drastically differently. I do think we would have applied, we would have presented ourselves better at the beginning, because we sort of saw the vulnerabilities speak for themselves and it doesn't even matter who reports them. But turns out that's not exactly true. The companies take the vulnerabilities with different levels of seriousness, depending on who reported and, what they think is going on, how public they think it's going to be. So we'd probably present ourselves better, as well as sort of maybe be a little bit tougher with the vendors in the initial stages. Mm-hmm. And we definitely involve CISA and CERT-CC right at the start. This time around, some of the emails we sent them also sort of dropped, but we would have made sure that that we involved them right at the start. And since we reported these vulnerabilities, I think next time companies will probably act quicker, faster, because they'll see when we report a vulnerability, it's probably the real deal. And we've been put on all kinds of special programs of different companies to fast track our disclosures, because they probably get a lot of sham disclosures, and a lot of people, think they found vulnerabilities and they're not sure. Actually, one of my previous employers wrote to me not long ago, and he said, I found this super critical vulnerability on my iPhone. And he was a serious security researcher. And he said, but I don't get it. This is too simple. And he was like, I'm opening my email without unlocking my phone, and it just opens, and I don't need a password, and he did this over and over. And then at some point we realized he just switched to the Face ID phone. So he was looking at the phone, and then, it was unlocking because it saw his face. So,
right.
And he's a very experienced security researcher, and he knew that this couldn't happen, but something was off. But I'm sure these companies get so many of these vulnerability reports that turn out to be not serious. People looking for attention, etc. So I think some things we'll be doing differently just because we're more well known with these organizations, with some of the vendors, and we'll definitely sort of involve the coordination agencies, which were super helpful right at the start.
Cool.
But I think we did it well in general. I wouldn't do anything completely different.
Yeah, I mean, we're recording this on the 15th of July, and there was somebody who I had seen on Twitter tweeting out that, I contacted this company and, they're not listening to me. And it's, communication is the key. It's not just, saying, I have this super critical vulnerability and whatever, because they have potentially hundreds of other super critical vulnerabilities, and, triaging a vulnerability, I found this thing and allows me to do Y. Well, okay, yeah, but we have something here that allows us to get domain admin on a box. So, you have to show us why your vulnerability is so much worse than the 15 other super critical CVSS 11 dash, I know it only goes up to 10, but my CVSS rating goes up to 11. But it's all in communication. And if some people in our community seem to forget that, and the art of communication. Even I'm guilty of not sometimes giving good information, or giving information in a way that affects or shows impact, not just from a business point of view, but from a functionality point of view. So it's good that you reaching out to third parties, or getting a second opinion on how you're approaching those things. And the way you talk to Trex may be, a completely different way than how you would talk to yet another company. So, that company may be a bit more litigious. Like you said, that you had some lawyers looking at your LinkedIn profiles. There might be another company that just throws you a C&D, or, don't ever talk about these things ever again, or we're going to sue you to, sue you out of business, that kind of stuff. So, it really does help to have, maybe a second opinion, or to read the room, and to read the tea leaves, and figure out how, and, the best way to go about doing that. So that's good to know. So, the last question that I have is, you mentioned Ghidra, you mentioned some of the other stuff for analyzing the TCP. Was there any other tooling that you realized that might have helped you when finding these exploits that you would have engaged with?
So let me just say about your last comment, because
sure.
It's important for us to mention that on the legal side, we were helped by the EFF.
Okay.
It's an NGO dealing with a bunch of important issues.
Right.
And one of the things they do is they help. So we specifically approach them through a Black Hat program. They help pro bono anyone who is doing this vulnerability disclosure, and we'll be speaking at Black Hat. And they worked with us throughout. They accompanied the whole process. They're still helping us out. So they sort of helped us, navigate the waters with the companies that were being a little bit more difficult, or a little bit more threatening, or things of that sort. And we definitely recommend that to anyone who's approaching a company that is known to be problematic, or with any sort of trouble that might arise, or any extremely critical vulnerabilities. They were extremely helpful. They're experts on the matter. It was free. I'm not sure what their policy is exactly, but they seem to think this is important. So definitely, that's one thing we would definitely do the same. Regarding tools, so we used Ghidra. We used all our regular tooling. We bought quite a lot of devices, quite a lot of copies of devices, and some development boards, where development boards were available for components. That was quite useful. So with the DigiConnect, we didn't just buy the device, we bought a development board. We acted as if we're a vendor. Anyone can buy a development board in order to develop their own products with the components. So we bought that development board, and it comes with a debugger and some other tools built in. We also used some IDA Pro disassembler for some stuff that Ghidra didn't support. I think that was about it. A lot of PowerPoint and LaTeX for writing up stuff. WordPress. You mentioned supply chain in WordPress. We used a pretty cool startup, Jerusalem-based, that we like, that makes your WordPress static, so you don't have any plugins. It just turns it into a static website, and that sort of helped us. They're called Static. They're great. That sort of helped us phase the initial wave of traffic that came after the disclosure. And also, we knew we wouldn't get in security reports like coming saying, this plugin's not updated, that plugin's not updated, etc. I think that's it. We kept it pretty simple with the tools. We didn't do any fuzzing in this case. What else did we do? Oh, one thing that was interesting that we did, we used a tool called bindiff to diff two different versions of a TCP IP stack, the Treck TCP IP stack, on a product by a vendor that uses a very new version of the Treck TCP IP stack. And we sort of got ideas for additional vulnerabilities by finding out what previous fixes were. So that was quite interesting, and it has some interesting consequences also on the future. How we're going to do research in the future, how other people could do research.
Nice.
For you for you personally, and separately for your company, was it worth it?
Time will tell. I think first thing is we've made an impact, a little impact, but an impact on the way people think about supply chain security and managing third-party risk. So that's important. And it was fun. It was definitely a fun project to do. It was fun doing the research, and it was fun going public. I think it will prove to be worth it as a company. And we did this as a company. I wouldn't really say for me, I'm a co-founder at the company. So, if it was worth it for the company, it's worth it for me. I think it will prove to be worth it, but I can't say we've made any new clients to date. We've had a lot of outreach following RIPPLE20. Maybe we've had some deals close faster once people saw this. They sort of take a few. We've had some big projects close recently that were already on the way before. But we're not measuring, the immediate financial impact or anything of that sort. It's more, about getting our name out there and showcasing our ability going forward. So we'll see in the next months and years if it was worth it.
Cool.
I think it will be.
Awesome. All right. So you're giving this talk pretty much an update at Black Hat. I'm assuming the Black Hat virtual. Do you know when you're going to be speaking?
We'll be speaking both at Black Hat and at DEF CON. We just got accepted to DEF CON. Okay, so it's August 5th, 10 a.m. to 10:40 a.m. I'm assuming this is West Coast. I'm assuming this is Vegas time zone, so right. So probably West Coast, 10 a.m. August 5th.
Okay. I'll put something in the show notes. It's an
online conference, of course.
Yeah, I'll put something in the show notes for the times and everything for when y'all will be talking. So, cool.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are y'all hiring? I mean, you said you had 12 people. If COVID being what it is and remote work being what it is, are you looking for people to come on and work at your organization?
We are. We're always hiring good security researchers. We give preference to people here in Jerusalem that are able to work locally, but we are open to remote positions in some cases. Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
If anyone's interested, in doing RIPPLE21 or Tidal Wave 21, maybe a better name for the next one.
Nice.
Definitely feel free to approach us through our careers email on our website.
If people wanted to, if they're using Trex or they're not sure they're using Trex and they're an IoT or an embedded, manufacturer, how would, maybe they want to understand how to fix those issues themselves or what have you, how would they get a hold of you to maybe, discuss ways forward, or maybe they have a TCP IP stack and they want to make sure that they're safe. How would they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so anything related to RIPPLE20, we have a lot of tools, scripts, information, documentation that can help. And of course, if they have any other questions about other TCP/IP stacks, or just other products, their own products or products they're using. The best way to contact us is the RIPPLE20 email. That's RIPPLE20 at JSOF-tech, JSOF-tech.com. And we answer anyone that writes to that email, with some anything that's not complete spam, we answer.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Shlomi Oberman, thank you for joining us. Always glad to have somebody of your with your knowledge on, and don't hesitate to reach out and so you can come back on again. We'd love to talk more about embedded security and research that you're doing. So that's awesome.
Thank you very much for having me, for inviting me.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Amanda, you've got a lot going on right now. I mean, other than your roof outside, which that old chestnut excuse of, I've got, roof issues. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now with, Hackers Health and all that. I will also be doing stuff at DEF CON and Black Hat. Maybe not DEF CON. No, just Black Hat. Sorry. They gave us several hours to do different mental health related things in a track. Okay.
So I'm actually recording my talk probably tomorrow. And you just ship it to them, and then they post it and do their fancy stuff. And then we also have a wife of somebody that is in InfoSec is a certified psychologist, and she's going to be doing a 45-minute talk, I think, on dealing with stress and everything in these times, work from home, whatever. And we're just going to have a chill out room where people can jump in and hang out for a bit. So
fantastic. Okay. How would people, if they were wanted to help out or join that, how would they get a hold of you and your organization?
Just DM me or DM us. It's several of us control a Twitter account now, at Hackers Health on Twitter, or I think it's volunteers at mentalhealthhackers.org.
Okay.
And we have a whole bunch of volunteers now in our Slack that do a variety of different things. Not a whole lot now since we can't really go places, but
right. Okay.
Still doing some stuff.
Are you going to be doing your tabletop, detect and defense, events?
Yeah, I actually, Jeremy and I actually registered an LLC last weekend.
Nice.
So I don't want to give off the name because it's still pending, but we're going to be giving it at, let's see here, Wild West Hacking Fest and Hackfest in Canada.
Okay.
Both. So we figured out a really good way to do all the exercises online as well as the tabletop stuff, which was interesting to try and test out. But now that Zoom has breakout rooms, we can push the different groups of people into breakout rooms and then have, it seems like it's going to work. So
you could use Roll20. You could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We also might give a small version of it for a select few people if you're interested, just to test out our infrastructure and stuff. I need a bunch of people to beat on it before we actually do a paid training.
Maybe we do that on our Brakesec Slack, but I'll tell everybody about that in a minute. Mr. Betcher, how are you doing, sir, with LogMD and all that?
LogMD is doing well. I think Michael will have done a talk on it at Sans Defer, which is online.
Okay.
There's 10,000 people showing up for that virtually. So
fantastic.
Hope you check that out. And if you'd like to find out more about it, log-md.com. It's a product he and I created for helping you defend Windows systems.
Okay, awesome. Very cool. All right. So yeah, our Slack, we have a community on our Slack for Brakesec folks and also for my local meetups that I've got. I've actually taken over both CSEC local meetups here in Seattle, and we're doing them virtually. So we have a speaker every month. Because of Black Hat and DEF CON on the 1st of August, we're going to be moving it to the 12th of August. Normally CSEC and CSEC East are local events, but they're as global as they can be, as if you can make it to evening time in Seattle. So we're going to have a couple speakers, and it's a networking event. So, we got people who are often looking for jobs or hiring. So, you can join us. Our Slack is invite only, but pretty much as long as you agree not to be a total D-bag, we will allow you to join us. So you can send us a DM on Twitter at Brakesec, which is also the official podcast handle, BRAKESEC, or you can send us an email to bds.podcast@gmail.com, and we'll send you an invite link for that. We have a lot of events going on the Slack. We have a book club. I think AWS pen testing is almost complete. I think we're still trying to figure out what we're going to be doing for another one of those book clubs. We have a sim and logging club. We have a education. PonySec is running regular videos and trainings on web app pen testing, things like CSRF, cross-site scripting, LFI, RFI, all that kind of stuff. Very, very noob friendly. We're very noob friendly as a community. We're moderated. We have a social contract. So if you're interested in joining us, please do so. Miss Berlin, you can find her on Twitter at
Infosister, INFOSYSTIR.
And Mr. Betcher can be found at... I got him on. There he is.
At Betcherpwned. BOETTCHERPWNED.
Right on. And you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE. And so we have patrons who put a little something in our tip jar every month. We appreciate their help with hosting fees, Zoom fees, time and effort just putting out a show. You can join us. All the links to our Patreon we have are on breakingsecurity.com, BRAKEING security.com. We have a TPub store where you can go and get t-shirts, coffee mugs, stickers, etc. You can get something there. And that gives us a little bit of kickback, but also since we don't have ways of handing out stickers at conferences anymore, that's a good way of getting some swag from the podcast and show that you're supporting us however you wish to. So we're on any major podcast catching platform, and we thrive on word of mouth and reviews. So please tell a friend, a colleague. If you're a CISP, tell your fellow CISPians that you get CPEs for podcasts. 1 hour is 1 CPE. So you can get your CPEs if you're not able to go to a conference anymore. That's a good way of getting your CPEs for the year. That's it for Bringing Down Security this week. And Shlomi, again, thank you for joining us. It was very educational. I'm glad we were able to get the message out there and to help everybody understand a little better about RIPPLE20. Hopefully, it'll be like the next DBIR or something like that, where you'll have a regular white paper talking about issues you've had with embedded systems. So looking forward to seeing that. And okay, so hope everybody has a great week. Take care of yourselves. Try to be nice to one another. Take care of yourself, because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Rachel Toback here, Chair of the Board for Women in Security and Privacy, also known as WISP. And I want to tell you about an opportunity to get involved in the community. On Friday, June 26th, the security community came together to lift and amplify the stories and work of Black security and privacy practitioners on Twitter and LinkedIn through the hashtag #ShareTheMicInCyber campaign, which was organized by Camille Stewart and Lauren Zabarick. In response to this campaign, we started raising funds for Najla, who was my partner in the campaign, also known as @4sci_Q on Twitter, to sit for the PMP, OSCP, and CISSP. We ended up raising the $2,000 to cover Najla's expenses, and we're now moving on to cover as many training, certification, and learning or advancement expenses as possible, incurred by Black security and privacy practitioners in the Share the Mic and Cyber group. As of right now, on July 6th, we have $16,000 raised and about $26,000 in needs for the community. Please consider a donation or a corporate sponsorship to cover these expenses. You can head on over to tinyurl.com/sharewisp for our donation page, or you can go on our Twitter page @wisp.org so you can see the full donation link yourself. You're security-minded, probably want to see the full URL. I get it. Thanks so much for taking action, and I'll see you on the internet.